Welcome to the third of the Introduction to the Modern United Nations videos. Today we're looking at procedure, and this is the thing which often confuses people because there's lots of rules and regulations and it seems quite alien at first. My fundamental advice would be this: definitely watch this video to get a sense of this, but it won't make complete sense. The whole system, the role of the chair, is designed to step by step tell you what to do at any one point. So as the chair, I would be saying, propose amendments, who supports it, this is the time limit. So you don't necessarily need to know everything. Although it will help make sense of everything, as you get used to it, you'll find that over the course of the days, particularly your first day, you'll get much more of a hang of how it works. So although definitely go through this and definitely listen to this and definitely make sense of how the procedure works, do not be alarmed if you can't recite off by heart exactly every step, because your job isn't necessarily to remember every step, it's just to react when I remind you of each step, or when the chair reminds you of each step. So, without further ado, this is a long slide, so we'll go from here. So, as you recall, our job is to have a resolution either in General Assembly or in a committee and edit it for its final use, i.e. there's a starting point resolution which is usually deeply unacceptable to everyone involved, and for a series of votes and debates remove it. Now you can't just shout and vote. If it doesn't have any order, then therefore it's going to be a massive problem. So in reality there are very, very strict rules, very relatively simple rules, but relatively strict rules which are the only ways to get these stuff done. And the idea behind this is you can't have an organisation of so many different little groups, so many different member states, try and come to conclusions on big issues without an order of who speaks, when they speak, how they speak, and so on. So the modern United Nations follows very much the procedures of the United Nations with some tweaks, obviously. But it's our job to understand the procedure and use the procedure to our advantage. So our mission is to amend, and the key phrase is amend this resolution. So on the left, we start a resolution and we remove stuff, we edit stuff, and we add stuff in. Now, we can't just shout at the chair to do it. We can't just shout, let's have a debate. We can't just shout, let's have a vote. There's a very strict methodical order which for Amendment 1 you follow all the way through, you have a vote, and then you do the same for Amendment 2 from start to finish. Then Amendment 3. Start to finish, and therefore you only deal with one amendment at a time. So let's say that very top red line, I want to remove from preambulatory clause 1 the middle sentence, and then you have a vote after a debate, and after that vote you then might say, okay, I want to do the very bottom one, add a new bit onto the third clause, the third from bottom operant clause, add this in, you have a debate, you have a vote, the next thing. So the idea is you only are ever debating one amendment at a time. An amendment is a change. It can be an addition, a removal, or an edit. And what we're doing over time is each cycle of proposal, amendment, debate, and so on, we are making changes, either positively or the votes are failing. So what we need to understand is, how does this process work? What are the challenges? What are the changes step by step, so that when they're happening in the meeting themselves, it will make more sense? So the way the system works is you first need to propose an amendment, so propose a change. And so long as that's got enough support that other people also are interested in voting on this, then you have a vote after a debate. Now, the debate might not have many people talking at all. It might be a long argument between two sides. That depends on the amendment you're proposing. So if it's relatively uncontroversial, no one might even want to debate against it at all. Whereas if it's a very, very controversial part, it might be a very long series of debates from both sides and then a vote at the end. Either way, you go through the process of proposing, debating, and then you have a final vote. So this sounds logical and sounds sensible from the outside, but often, because there's lots of little steps in between which make a lot of sense once you get it but are quite weird the first time you see it, people often get confused. So before we start, it's important to understand who is there as the Secretariat. Now, for those unaware, the Secretariat of the UN are the impartial it's almost backroom staff or these sort of impartial referees of the UN. Their job is to make sure the debate continues and flows easily. They are not there as representatives of a particular nation, though obviously they will be from different nations. They're there as almost as a neutral force. Now, there's lots of different roles in the Secretariat, but obviously for the United Nations, we have a reduced number. And generally, we tend to have these three. We have the chair, the secretary, and the meeting services assistants. Usually there's more than one of those. The chair is the head of the debate. They are the impartial manager who makes sure procedure gets set, followed, organised, and any problems gets dealt with. They are the ones who look at the members. They're the ones with the gavel. They're the ones who will say who's going to speak when, for how long, and keep time and keep score. The secretary is the assistant to the chair. While the chair is dealing with the debate, listening to people, following rules, there needs to be someone who looks at the amendments, processes them, decides which one's next, keeps track of who's speaking when, keeps track of orders, updates the resolutions with changes. This is actually a very, very important role, and they are, considering they're the ones who will screen and look at the amendments to see what's suitable, they're very important to make sure that you keep happy. So their job is to sit usually to the right of the chair and keep track of this information, usually with a computer. So the chair is obviously focused on the debate, and the secretary is much more the paperwork, records, and updates from there. However, they will work very closely, and very often the chair will give responsibilities to the secretary, and the secretary will pass some of the tasks onto the chair as is needed. The last group are the meeting services assistant. The meeting service assistants are the people who help pass messages and do what the chair says. So normally when they're not doing anything that the chair has told them to do, they are stood around the room, and should you want to send a message in the middle of a debate, obviously therefore you can't get out of your own chair or say anything, you can write it down on a piece of paper and pass it or get it passed to the relevant country. Now some people go wrong here. The piece of paper, the slip of paper you need to have must be have the message written on side of it, folded over with the addressee, who you want it to be sent to, on there. If you just give the meeting service assistants a message, they have no idea which country that's meant to get to, and they will refuse to take it. So the best course of action is, you on one side of a piece of paper you write your message, you fold it over so it's secret, because obviously you don't want their neighbours looking at it or your neighbour looking at it, and then you write the country who it's to on the front, and they deliver it to them. Okay. They will be often the busiest people, and very often they are people who are newer to modern United Nations, who want to get a feeling for how it works without committing to making a whole country themselves. So what is the process of the debate? Now there are slightly different variations to the rules depending on what you're doing, but generally the debate and the structure of any procedure follows the same idea. Nothing can happen unless it's proposed. You can propose an amendment, you can propose an adjourning, you can propose the opening of a debate. And what that is someone saying, let's do this thing. Now in the UN, you can't just do anything unilaterally. You can't do anything because you want to. It has to be supported. So the chair will then usually see how many people support it. And if it has support, then it will happen. Now, because everyone wants to talk and everyone has an opinion, and actually there are many people who might filibuster, that means talk until basically there's no other time left, certain bills, the chair sets a time limit. They may say, we have 2 minutes, we have an hour to discuss this debate, this opening list. That will depend a lot on how important the chair thinks it is, the amount of other amendments or stuff that has to be done, the likelihood that this is going to be controversial, and so on. The speakers list is then drawn up. So once you've decided, okay, we are going to have this proposal, support, that we're going to have it for this much time, then who's going to speak for and who's going to speak against? That is up to the chair and the secretary. So what they will do is they'll usually ask people to identify who wants to talk, they will take down that list, and they will decide the order. This is very important because the order is decided by the chair and secretary, and there's no negotiations really beyond that point. If you have been speaking a lot, you might find yourself at the bottom of the list, which means that if the time limit for your side of the debate, all the people who want to argue for, runs out before it's your turn, you won't have a chance to speak. So the list on the speakers is who speaks second, who speaks third, who speaks fourth, who speaks fifth, and so on. Just because you're on the list doesn't mean you have the right to speak. If the time limit for your side runs out, then you can no longer, or you won't be able to speak. To help towards as many people having a conversation as possible, having a say as possible, based on the number of people who want to speak, the chair will then decide how long each side is allowed to speak for. So they'll say, for example, say they have given 10 minutes for debate and 5 people on each side want to speak. They might say each person has a minute to speak for their side. They will cut you off if you break the speech. If you carry on speaking or ignore the chair, then obviously you may be liable for censure. So once he has set the time, or she has set the time that you can speak, you then have the speeches. At the end of each speech, at the end of time of speaking, you can choose to yield. Yielding means, and now I give the mic back, essentially. What you normally do is you'll yield back to the chair. So if you say I yield to the chair, then the chair goes back in control of who's speaking, and he'll go or she'll go on the next person on the list. If you have time left over, let's say you had a minute and you've used 40 seconds, you may choose to yield to another member state. So you might yield to the Right Honourable Delegate from Madagascar, for example. And then that will give them your remaining time to speak, those 20 seconds. So when you speak, it's not just a matter of saying stuff. You then yield to the chair or another member if there's time left over. Once you have done all the speeches, or the time limit has run out, the overall time has run out, you then go to the vote. Now, there are 2 options of voting normally. You can either vote there and then, or you can do something called tabling. Tabling is when you put off a vote until the end. Now, this might be logical. For example, if you think there might be a better amendment coming down the line, but you don't want to get rid of this one just in case there's not, you can table it, and then when you come at the end, you might be able to go, right, I know this is passed, and therefore actually I think that's better. Or we didn't actually get anything better passed, let's vote for this. In addition, if you've made a deal with someone that you'll vote for them if they vote for you, tabling it is a good way to make sure that you don't vote for them and then suddenly they go back on their word because the vote is now at the end. Tabling will always happen at the very end of the debate, just before the final vote. So this is the basic structure. And it will always follow this, although it's a bit more complicated in each step. The proposal, let's do a thing. Who else agrees, support? Okay, we're going to set this much time. Who wants to talk? This is how long you've got to talk for. Then they talk. Then you have a vote. That structure follows all. So we're going to go on to the next stage about step by step. And it can look quite confusing, but as long as you realise it's the same logic, okay, of this, going round and round again, because once you finish the vote, you then propose a new thing all the way through. Finish the vote again, propose a new thing. Table that one, go back to the new thing. That is the key thing going forward. So there are 2 major things you need to do using these procedures. One is open the debate, so start the debate, and one is to make amendments. So if you are opening debates, you've just sat down, it's 9 a.m, we've just started the MUN, and now we need to someone needs to propose a motion. They will propose a motion to debate a resolution. A motion is, I propose let's do this thing. Okay, and a motion can be anything within reason. Motion for a caucus, motion to dismiss, motions to split the question. For more details about what motions are available, look at the handbook. They tend to be more of an advanced thing once you be more confident. There's a list of the available motions you can make in the instructional manual given with the proposals. So the delegate will propose a motion. Now, once you propose something, they have to see if there's support. So let's say, is there a second? A second is when another member state says, I also believe we should do this. And so chair asks, another delegate says they do. And then they say, right, shall we have a debate? Yes, no, or abstain. And then the delegates vote. The way you vote in modern United Nations is you hold up the placard, which is a piece of paper with your name on it. Okay, your nation's name on it. So if more people say yes than no, then obviously yes. If more people say no than yes, then we've got a problem and there's no debate. So the person proposes, sees if there's support. If there's support, then you then set a time limit for the opening speeches. So when you open a debate, you can have, we're about to talk about environment. Who wants to give an opening speech to tell us their broad position? And they might say, well, I only want 10 minutes for this because I want to get straight to the amendments. So the chair might say, yes, we passed. Let us now set 10 minutes for opening speeches. So they then set the time for this debate. After setting the time, what do? They write the speakers list. Who wants to talk as an opening debate? They ask them to raise your placards. They then decide the order. Once you have done the speech list, what do? The times. All right, we've got this many people. We've got this much time. That's 30 seconds each. This many people, this much time. That's an hour each. Once you have decided how much time each person has, you then speak. Each person in turn, they yield to the chair, or if they've got any time left over, they may yield to another member. After you do that, then the chair finishes. So it's the same structure: proposal, support, time for debate, speakers list, time for speeches, vote. Now the same is true for the majority of what you'll be doing, which is this, the resolution. What happens is the chair says we are going to have amendments. If you wish to make an amendment, you have to write them up using the correct language, legibly, in a way that the secretary can read and understand and make sense of where you want changed and how. If that is not clear, they'll just reject it, so you need to do it properly. And then what you'll do is you'll put it up in the air, in your seat, you'll hold your hands up in the air with the amendment written on it. The meeting services assistants will pick it up, take it to the secretary. They will pile them up and start deciding which one to ignore, which one to do. So that is the proposal. What happens after the proposal? The support. So the secretary passes the chair the first amendment that he or she thinks is good, okay, or suitable. The chair says, this is the first amendment. Who agrees that we should talk about this amendment? And essentially, what they do is they ask for sponsors. So the chair, let's say there's an amendment to a proposal about climate change, which says let's get rid of a carbon tax from 10% to 0%. The chair says, okay, who wishes to vote or have a discussion on this amendment? Are there any sponsors? And if you are interested in debating this, either for or against, doesn't matter. But if you want this to be debated, then you raise your placards. If more than 12.5% of the delegates of people there say, actually, this is something I want to talk about, then it will move on. So it will have support. After support, what's the next thing? Time limit. Based on this amendment, it's quite controversial. Let's have an hour. Let's have 10 minutes. Let's have 2 minutes. Okay? And they'll say, right, if we have 2 minutes, that's 1 minute for, 1 minute against. If we have an hour, half an hour for, half an hour against. And once they set the time limit, what's the next step? Right, who wants to talk? And then they raise your placards. I want to talk, I want to talk. The secretary and the chair make the list. Once they've done the speakers list, all right, we've got 10 people for 10 minutes. Let's set the time limit, 1 minute per place. 10 minutes per talk, 20 seconds per talk. However, they set a time limit. Once they set a time limit, what happens? You do your speeches. You either yield back to the chair or to another speaker if you've got time left over. The debate ends when either the time limit set overall or that everyone has spoken on the list. Once you have done the speeches, so once you have proposed, support, set the time limit for the whole debate, come up with a list who will speak and how long they can speak for each, done the speeches, you then have the final option. You can either table or vote. Okay? If it is tabled, then what happens is going to be slightly different to if it's voted. Okay? So, number one, it can be proposed by a motion just prior to the vote to table it. So someone might put their placard up and say, Mr. or Ms. Speaker, Mr. or Ms. Chair, I wish to make a motion. Is this seconded? Yes. Fine. What is your motion? I wish to motion that this vote be tabled until the end of the debate. Then we have a vote. If it passes, it's tabled. If it's not, then we go on to a straight vote. If that vote for tabling fails, or no one wants to table it, they want to vote it here and now, then we have a standard vote. Who votes? Yes, no, or choose not to vote, i.e. abstain. The majority passes. Once you have done either of these things, you've either tabled it or you've voted on it, the debate has ended. And therefore you go back to proposing the next amendment. So the secretary has, you do the support, you set the time limit, you do the speakers list, you do the speech times, do the speeches, vote again and round again. And it's a whole circuit. Now at each stage, the chair will say, this is what we're doing now, this is what we're doing now, this is what we're doing now. So I would say don't stress too much if you don't really follow it here and now. If you can remember the 7 core elements: proposal, support, time limit for debate, speakers list, speech time, speeches, and vote and tabling it, you are pretty much fine. This repeat will keep going until the time limit for the overall debate, set at the very start, if you remember when we opened it, is completed. And then what will happen is we vote on any tabled amendments there and then we vote on the overall resolution as it stands. So, as a recap, what we are doing in this procedure is we're following a very strict order of doing things in order to basically not have a mini civil war every time we want to change something. Each of you will want stuff that you want to remove add, or edit in the resolution. The only way you do this is proposing an amendment. The chair checking that it has at least 12.5% support, setting a time limit for a debate depending on how important or popular the issue is, setting a list of who can speak and who cannot, setting a time that each person speaks based on how many people want to speak, and then allowing people step by step to having speeches. Once they have done this, then you have a vote or you table it, and then you recap and recycle and recycle. This sounds like a lot, but you'll get the hang of it very quickly. And once again, and I've said it several times, it's really important worth emphasizing. If you don't get it here and then, don't stress. The chair's job is to do it step by step, and you'll get the hang of it very quickly. As well as that, there are plenty of resources on the day with these cheat sheets almost in mind of how you do this. So until the next video, where we're looking at more precise rules, this should hopefully demystify an element of the process. I would suggest, if you're not sure, going over this again and looking at the instructions, but don't expect to fully understand this first time around. Until the next video, see you then.